if you have two engines that are exactly the same in every way, shape, and form, but you have more documentation behind one than you do the one that you have the more documentation behind is more valuable.
This is the Time on Wing podcast. Welcome back. I'm Courtney Miller with Visual Approach Analytics. With me, as always, Garrick Deschavannes of Collateral Verifications. Garrick, who are we talking to today?
So today, we will be talking to Adam Belusko. So he is currently the Global Head of Sales and Business Development at Avtrac. And we'll be hearing more about kind of what those guys do, which will be interesting from that standpoint as well. And so he's, to me, I think Adam is very much a kind of a sales-focused, driven type individual. And so when you look at his background, it definitely comes across that way. He was Director of Business Development at Jet Air Group, or he still is, I believe, as well. He's also was in strategy and design lead for GoGoCana. He was a wealth management advisor for DBM Wealth Management, Director of Client Engagement for Perfecta Software, Chief Revenue Officer for JustGoodNews.biz, a Sales Account Manager for Dell. He was also played around in the mortgage space a little bit through banking, was VP and Director of Mortgage Operations at Great Plains Bank, partner and head of operations for Loris Mortgage Group, a mortgage loan originator for First United Mortgage Company, and he also went to the University of Oklahoma where he got his bachelor's degree. So we're certainly looking forward to kind of speaking with him and seeing what's going on with Avtrac and also the industry. So Adam, this is your time on Wing.
Just a quick intermission before we continue with the show. We do get a lot of questions about how our listeners can support the show, and frankly, the easiest way is to continue the spirit of the show, which is just to reach out to us at conferences. But we also run businesses as well, and you can support us by supporting a lot of the work that we do. You can support the work that I do through Visual Approach by visiting visualapproach.io, where we produce a lot of research and analysis, a lot of data visualizations. From
my side, obviously, I focus more on metals, so anything that's aircraft related, if you're looking for valuations, whether it's on aircraft engines, I'm happy to help with any of those types of projects. So we appreciate certainly the opportunities to work with all of you, and we certainly also appreciate just the fact that people are willing to listen to what we have to say and enjoy kind of our thoughts and takes on what we think is a fascinating industry. So thank you.
Okay, back to the show.
Thank you for being on the show. We really appreciate you taking the time today. One of the things that we always love to hear about is kind of how each of our guests kind of got their start in aviation. And I think you had mentioned that you had kind of a funny, interesting story in terms of how you got there. So we'd love to hear it. So I'll let you have at it.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me, guys. My intro into aviation was a little different. I'm definitely not a lifelong aviator, pilot, military guy, anything like that. I don't have that background
yet.
Well, I actually met the company I work for, Avtrac, is a privately held, family-owned business out of London Gatwick Airport, and I met the founder's son in Norman, Oklahoma, when he was on a project. There's an AAR facility in Oklahoma City, and I met him through a mutual connection back in like 2008, and we were friends for almost 10 years before he came to me it was December of 2017 and asked me if I would be interested in coming over and heading up their business development, sales, and marketing from a global scale, I guess, and that was kind of the rest is history after that. So that's how I got my introduction into aviation, and I've been very fortunate to work with a team, like I said, that has been around for 31 years. The company was founded in 1992. So I got a crash course, I guess, from everybody who I work with on, what we actually do, how we manage the aircraft transition, pre-purchase and redelivery, due diligence, mid-lease inspection programs, stuff like that. so enough technical knowledge to kind of be a little dangerous. And then I used kind of a system that I've developed working with other companies, mostly early stage companies in highly regulated industries, such as like Food and Drug Administration regulated software, the mortgage industry where I kind of got my start. But in regulated industries, how I've marketed within those. And, generally, I would say, Garrick, the people that we're talking to are have kind of the same personalities as other very highly regulated industries, in that they don't want to be bombarded with marketing speak. They don't want an email, a phone call from you every week. But what they do want is they want to know that if they have a problem, that there's options out there for how they might be able to solve that problem.
Now, see, so for people who may not know Adam, I remind you that you probably have met him or seen him, right? If you've been to any of the air shows, conferences, or whatever, which is a great opportunity for me to remind you that we actually put this on YouTube as well if you want to see the video. And when you see Adam, it'd be like, oh, yeah, the guy at all the conferences. Like, yeah, now that's Adam? Awesome.
The guy walking around going, Belusko, and just walking away.
Yeah. I was telling somebody, they say, who's your next guest? I said, Adam Belusko. He goes, Adam Pilarski? I go, no, Adam Belusko. They go, Pilarsko? Like, no, this guy. Like, this yeah. It's as soon as they see your face, like, yeah, Adam, of course, awesome. But
hopefully it's a good feeling, right? When they see it and they're like, oh, the guy's not here to hunt me down and try and sell me something, right? Like,
depends on who you are.
Yeah.
Depends on who you are. You've just done a lot, Adam. I know you've done a lot. And I don't want to limit this to just the aviation conversation.
I've been involved in multiple businesses. Like I said, I think when I was thinking about this and we connected on the opportunity for me to come on, I think, I started thinking about, what am I first, right? Like as a professional. And, truth be told, I guess I'm probably mostly an entrepreneur first. And then, I've just happened to work in the strategy and business development side of things for the majority of my career, right? I've only had one real corporate sales job, and I, was only there for 4 years. So, that didn't really suit me. I like the idea of being involved in the strategy, finding areas where niche companies can accelerate, and that's kind of how I got into early stage, working with early stage companies. So I have been involved in early stage companies. Like I said, I started in the mortgage industry back in 2004. So, I had a couple of good years, and then the subprime crisis kind of fell apart. We did know, we kind of saw the writing on the wall. So we were able to pivot that company away from doing conventional and subprime type stuff to doing government, so FHA, VA type loans, here in the United States only. And then we actually exited that company, my former business partner and I, back in 2009. So from 2007 to 2009, I owned that company with a partner, and we exited that company, and that kind of gave me, I guess, my seed money to kick down the path and get involved in some of the other stuff that I wanted to do. And so I have worked to help monetize products, from concept to product, and then onwards to monetization. Just like every serial entrepreneur out there, some of these deals get funded and some of them don't. Some of them you're involved in, for a short period of time, and some of them you stay with for a little bit longer. But I mean, that's kind of, I think, the mindset that I take to everything, including, what I do with Avtrac, is from the mindset, I guess, of, where do we have that differentiator? And how can I leverage that differentiation to benefit the industry and ultimately, to grow the company?
Yeah, which that was actually going to be my next question regarding Avtrac. So when you look at, obviously you guys are predominantly kind of a, technical services company, asset management, that type of company. So when you look at that and you look at a company that's been doing this now for, I guess, 30 years, almost 30 years, over 30 years?
30 years last year.
Yeah. So how do you look at that and, try to take it to the next step, right? To take it to so that they're around for another 30 years.
Yeah. And truth be told, I'm speaking with the founder of the company, Tino Berry, who I work with daily at this point, right? I don't know that Avtrac in its current existence is around in 30 years, just because of, the overwhelming push toward machine learning, automation of what we focus on in the technical records auditing part of technical asset management, right? I do think, and we have this conversation a lot right now, especially, but I do think that the human element of buying and selling aircraft is probably never going to go away. Right. So there's always going to be some requirement for a trusted advisor, a trusted third party to come in and validate what your assumptions are, what your knowledge base is, depending on, or regardless of which side of the transaction you're on. And I think that's where, I see Avtrac excelling as we move into the future is that experience and that knowledge base that our team has from working together and working with our long-term clients, over a period of decades, right? So I think that kind of separates us. I do see a lot of like consolidation amongst smaller firms to compete with companies out there that have unlimited resources for software development and the use of artificial intelligence and stuff like that. That, truth be told, we're not able to really home grow too many of those systems. But, if we can partner with companies or we can find ways to align ourselves with other companies, that can be, beneficial to us and really help us optimize kind of our operational efficiency, right? Like, ultimately, the goal is, for me, to make it super basic, is to have the footprint, the human capital footprint that we have right now, manage more airplanes than we manage today, and manage them more efficiently, and make sure that our long-term clients stay with us and continue to utilize our services. So I think we have to get, I'm not going to say leaner, by having, reduced headcount, or I'm not trying to replace people with automation, but I'm trying to use that to help us all get better and get more efficient and effective in what we do daily.
I think what you touched on regarding AI and just kind of how it affects individual businesses, I think is really, really poignant. I mean, there's two ways to look at it, and kind of two responses that I get from companies when I talk about it. One way is, hey, we can be replaced with robots. Our jobs are at risk. I'm like, well, if they are, that means you weren't very good at what you were doing. But the other way is, wow, we can be way more productive.
Yep.
And it's like leaning into it. Like you said,
yep.
The human element's not going away. Now, look, I assume we're all kind of Gen Xers here. And if you look at the generation before us, they were all like, oh yeah, you'll always be able to pay cash at McDonald's, right? So we could be the old guys just out of touch.
Yeah.
But teleconferencing will never work.
Teleconferencing
will never work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, teleconferencing will never work. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
yeah. Well, you know what'll happen?
I mean, I think what's interesting about the certainly the stuff that you guys do, and I think what we've seen probably over the last couple of years, is I think the level of experience in people that, especially when you focus on the technical side, I mean, you have to know what you're doing, right? And that's one thing that I know on the appraisal side. When I look at valuing an airplane, if it gets to be, too technical, then all of a sudden I look for outside expertise to be able to help me with that, just because, I have some similarity to you and what you've said before. It's like you have enough to be somewhat dangerous, but not enough to be like, hey, look, yeah, I know exactly what I'm looking at. And I think that experience you can't necessarily replace with AI. As you said, I think what you can do is, all of a sudden make the process of going out and inspecting an airplane or reviewing records, that can then all of a sudden be shortened based, using technology, using AI, using everything else that normally would take, you're looking at, several man days just to look at one thing. Now all of a sudden you're able to do that a lot faster, or you're able to do that without having to be on site. I think that's where you kind of make the process much more efficient, which I think that just kind of helps the industry overall.
No, I agree 100%, Garrick. We are looking at multiple pieces of software for implementation in 2024 that will allow us to do just those sorts of things, such as uploading, batch uploading records, and getting them named and into a file structure that then we can go in to audit automatically without having to sort through all of the documents individually by ourselves first, right? There, as basic as that, all the way up to, to OCR type stuff, where we're not just searching a document, but for OCR text recognition, but we're actually asking an AI bot on top of the OCR component to tell us the remaining cycles or life on a part, without having to just go in and search that document. We're just being able to ask a piece of software to say, hey, how many cycles are left on this component or whatever, that kind of stuff out there, like that technology at a broader scale certainly already exists and is very much permeating its way into aviation and what we do daily. There is still in this industry, and I'd love to hear your guys' feedback on this, but there is still in this industry the idea of siloing your own data and everybody kind of being like, that's my data, hands off my data, which I think is why we haven't really gotten to that whole blockchain technical records, everybody sharing everything yet. Ultimately, if you were to ask me, gun to my head, I think that's delaying the inevitable. And I think at some point we will have kind of this open source technical records for engines and major components out there. But, that's probably still a decade down the road.
What drives that? What pushes that forward, do you think?
What, the acceleration into that open source kind of data sharing? I mean, I think the number one thing we have to get away from right now would be the fact that, if you have two engines that are exactly the same in every way, shape, and form, but you have more documentation behind one than you do the other one, the one that you have the more documentation behind is more valuable.
And I've got my intro for this podcast. That's so well said, right? That's so true, right? I mean, but that's how important documentation is. Same identical components, different value because of the paper trail. And that kind of gets me more to, the AOG, is it AOG Technics? Was that the...
Yeah, are you talking about the falsified form one?
Yeah, which really just kind of pushes this conversation to the forefront, right? How has that affected the work that you're doing, or has it?
It's out. I mean, it has. It's out there. This was presented to us on a panel in Singapore a couple of weeks ago, right? And right now, all we're really seeing are documents or statements from sellers stating that, to my knowledge, that this engine doesn't have, right? However, until the entire inventory of parts from AOG Technics is made available to the broader industry, how do we guarantee that, right? So I think ultimately, and I don't know that I said this when we were talking about it on the panel, but ultimately, I think we're probably naive to think that that's the only company that's ever done anything like that. It's
right.
Yeah.
terrifying.
That's terrifying, and yet
terrifying.
obviously true, right?
I mean, again, when the dollars are in the details or in the data, and everything has to be traced, what's stopping somebody from taking the short route if it's on a non-critical part or something, and now, as a company that's been around for 30 years, and there are other companies that do the same thing as us, right? And as a camo and a long-standing technical consultant, we often get requests, right, for updated like NIS statements or matching cycles. If we had an aircraft on our camo and there was a ferry flight, and updating a one cycle NIS or something like that. Like that just happened a couple weeks ago, right? And as long as we can validate it, we're not the type of company that's going to go out and be like, okay, well, we'll do that, but it's $6,000, or we want $5,000 to update this statement because we know that you need it for your full trade, and ultimately it's increasing the value of your asset to have this document. So there are companies out there that are tried and true and trustworthy that can provide that type of information and even have those contacts to operators that may have gone out of business or people who have moved on. So there is collaboration and the willingness to work together to get around this stuff. But then there's also companies that are here today, gone tomorrow, and happy to make a couple $1 million trading shoddy parts, and then away they go.
I mean, imagine.
That's every industry, though, right, Courtney?
Yeah, I know. We just happen to be one where when things go wrong, there's a fireball.
Yeah, I mean, safety is everything, right?
Yeah, especially aviation.
And that's unfortunate. That's kind of, we have to get to that point a lot of times to make the necessary changes to account for that, right? Because I mean, you would think that with the AOG, debacle, that somebody would step in and go, okay, well, I mean, there's already things that are in place, but obviously things were missed, right? Or were so. What else do we need to do? And that should be, to me, the push forward to have some kind of a blockchain type process that where you're able to see everything, right? And you're able to, but it's the same thing with like, also things need to be digitized and need to, like, everything that whole thing needs to be done. But it just, it's such a massive undertaking that I don't think anybody wants to be the first one to be like, oh, we should be doing that, because that's when we be like, are you going to pay for it? Because I'm not paying for it. And that's why it's going to take a while.
Thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that is one thing, is nobody wants to do the heavy lifting just so everybody else can benefit from it, right? Like, nobody's willing to foot that bill. At the same time, like I said, if you're holding more data than anybody else, or you're holding more data than your competitor, then ultimately you're in a better position to leverage the value of the asset up, right? But the other thing that I think is important is, this AOG Technics thing is still very infant in us finding out about it, right? So maybe this is the catalyst to kind of kickstart that conversation again. And again, being still the new kid on the block in this industry, it's 6 years, we've been talking about blockchain for digital data, digital technical data, the entire time I've been in the industry. And we are no closer, from my estimation, from what I've seen, we're no closer today than we were on December 1st, 2017, when I joined Avtrac, right? So, it's going to take, unfortunately, from my opinion, it's going to take more of these incidents to generate that conversation. And, that's not to say that there can't, that something good can't come out of fear. And we're not trying to fearmonger here, but that something good can't come out of fear from this being an issue. But you just hope it never gets to the point where somebody loses their life over a failed part that had a faked Form 1 or some other, falsified back to birth traceability, and it cost somebody a life. Like, that's the crazy thing that we all deal with on a daily basis, is ultimately, the value of the metal is one thing, the value of a life, oof. I don't want to
Yeah.
put the dollar. I don't want to be the one to value that.
And
I don't
really,
want that on my
the
conscience.
value of that is the value of confidence in the industry, like for
Yeah.
people to continue to travel. But I mean, just to play devil's advocate, I mean, aviation, the history of aviation, specifically from a regulatory perspective, is written in blood. Right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
they're responding to those very same incidents. And even when they were identified before there was a fatal accident, often, like through history, I think, so there has been, if we really think about it, there has been that other event that's happened on the fake part side, and is Russia, right? With
Yeah.
with the sanctions there, and whatever they're doing to fly airplanes out of fields. Which last I heard, they're still trying to fly that out, aren't they? I mean, they put a fence around it, and I think they're still going to try to fly that thing out. But what I'm interested in, well, I'm interested in the whole topic, but the blockchain part of it is fascinating to me. Just the word blockchain is fascinating to me, because that has taken on different meaning over those past 6 years that you're talking about, right? Since 2017. I was meeting with a lot of companies that were looking into the blockchain. Then you had the crypto run up after the Bitcoin halving and all that,
Monster rally going on now.
Well, right. Well, so then that collapsed, by the way, just like it does every time after.
Yep.
Right? Whatever. I mean, it's a cycle, but the hype cycle was extreme at that point. Sure. But so the word blockchain means something different to different people. It means almost like a scam to people in the industry, because they don't, or in any industry, they don't actually know what it is that's being discussed. I mean, it's a very technical just source of security, right? Document security.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, when you're getting down to it, the real term here is decentralized, repository, right? We're basically we find pathways for technical data to be uploaded in as close to real time as possible, to where through a subscription everybody is paying for the maintenance of this data set that we can use to validate what's being presented, from buyer to seller and so on and so forth. But ultimately, for anybody who needs access to something, to a record for one reason or another. Again, when we go back to like the AOG type stuff, right? Like, it's hard to validate what, you can't validate something that's been falsified, right? But if everybody had access, or if more people had access, more companies had access to the legitimate record repository of everything, this type of stuff would be easier, more easily mitigated, right? Like, you wouldn't have, if there were a decentralized, data set of technical documents out there for people, these types of companies would have a harder time kind of getting off the ground, right? Because, it's hard to falsify something if the majority of the industry trusts that it's all in one place. And right now we don't have anything close to that, right?
Yeah, the decentralized nature too. I think the conversations I've had, the rare conversations, I don't talk about this all the time. I just act like I do. But those conversations, and I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so there's that. But the conversations I've had, I do want to point out a couple of keywords that you mentioned that I really picked up on. Open source, and there's a term for open source. I don't know if this fits the technical term, but the idea of open source and diversified are key in this, because the conversations I've had with companies, they're like, yeah, this is exactly what we need to do. Diversify, open source, and we want to control it. I'm like, but wait, what? No.
The minute that they say they want to control it, it's not open.
Right? Like that's you just
Yeah. Yeah.
But think about
source siloed.
I know, right? Yeah, we don't want any silos, but we want to control everything and put it into one lane, but no silos. Like what? But I think kind of taking that a step further, what we're talking about is the need for a system that takes out the incentive for people to create it. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because you create a system like that to monetize it. And not that there aren't monetization opportunities. Absolutely there are in something like that if you're adding value. But it requires the next step. But I do think things are progressing in that direction almost inevitably. Because the next time something happens, the next time somebody finds, falsified records or something along those lines, then the company that can prove that, nope, not on mine, benefits. So it's in their benefit for the system to exist.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, right? And I mean, it's kind of, I've used this analogy with regards to some of the issues that are being faced by, OEM delivery delays, but, with something like this AOG thing, it's almost like you've got a wound, you don't know how bad it is, you're tearing off the Band-Aid, and as you start to pull that Band-Aid back, it's like how much worse can this get, right? And you don't know the severity of anything until you fully remove the Band-Aid or the bandage, and then you're either sitting there going, that's not that bad. You're like, oh shit, that is like my hand's about to fall off, And I think we use, like I said, we've used that to talk, that kind of analogy I've used to talk about some of the experiences with OEM delays. Obviously, kind of with what happened at Spirit Aerosystems. It just seems like it's kind of one thing right after another. But with this AOG thing, again, kind of going back to that, I can't believe that they're the only ones out there, and I think we're going to find out that there are more people, more companies probably that have done something similar to this, if not exactly like this. And so ultimately, once we realize how bad it is, that may be what we need to say, okay, let's the good guys get together, the good actors, the guys who kind of have built this industry, let's get everybody together, the guys that understand technical data, the guys that understand how to value assets based on, the metal and the data behind them. And let's get everybody together and figure out, let's set up the foundation or the framework for what this could look like. We haven't even, truth be told, aside from a couple of wireframes that exist out there that I'm sure you've probably seen, there isn't much thought about what would this actually look like if we were to launch it and start? How would we continue to feed it? Who has access to it? How does it get monetized? How do we pay for it? Who's responsible for the upkeep? How do we get the OEMs to work together? There's so many, if you're talking about setting up a business plan for this, there are so many things that we just have to ask ourselves before we can even think about how it's going to help us 10 years from now, 20 years from now.
And most important of those things that have yet to be defined is how whatever currency is going to be used to exchange with the blockchain. And let me just be the first to lobby for the time on wing coin.
Oh yeah, you want a new coin?
Time on wing coin. Nice.
This is not on the set sheet, but I can get behind this.
Yeah, see. I do.
Yeah.
You mentioned, okay, so we were talking about AOG Technics and the potential for almost inevitability for other things like that to be happening. But I do kind of want to talk about the spectrum of possibility in that. Because, and I don't know exactly, and I think we're still kind of learning exactly what happened at AOG Technics, but let's just work from the assumption that, it's kind of nefarious. There was active deception involved. But there's a whole, like I said, spectrum through negligence to, I guess we just weren't keeping great records that something like this would solve. What are you, certainly without pointing fingers, but kind of what are you seeing more to like the middle of that spectrum of just, we'll call it non-standardization that this would standardize. I mean, does that kind of open up the opportunities for like value of a system like this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it does, right? But I don't think we can even begin to speculate as to how we would assign that value, right? Like, I mean, ultimately,
if only we had an appraiser on the podcast.
If only, I know.
Somebody who arbitrarily applies value to things.
You tell us how having having the asset sitting there with fully verified data from, let's say, from every owner and every manufacturer of every major component, say, and every shop visit, right? So, I mean, there's so many things to introduce here, but guarantees from every entity involved that data is clean 100% every time it changes hands.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the gold standard, right? That's what gets created. The issue is who starts that, who becomes the provider of that gold standard. Now, it should be, when you think about it, it should be something that could be fairly easily done today with new airplanes, right? I mean, if you think about the technology that's in new airplanes, right?
Start from scratch.
So that should be
setting a baseline there, right?
Exactly. That should be the starting point, so that ultimately whatever is being built today is on that. And then from there, you can start introducing, so it does go back to the OEMs to a certain extent, where, look, they are the ones. Problem with that is that they look at it and go, well, yeah, we have the ability to do that. But we can get, probably fees from that because of what we're able to monitor and what we're able to do with that data and help our operators. And, so all of a sudden it's trying to figure out, all right, so how do we monetize that versus just,
absolutely,
no, that creates a level of safety that the industry needs and is looking for. And so that's why we're doing it. Because ultimately it just makes everybody around the world feel like, okay, well, as long as we know that everything's basically checked, then we'll be okay, right? And when it's not, that's when you have to go, do we really, if we don't know where the data is coming from, if we don't trust it, then do we want to take that chance, right? And then it's up to you if you want to take the risk or not. But if you take the risk, then you have to be responsible for whatever, liability comes out of that. Right? Yep. To me, that's where it starts.
Yeah, so I think, one of the things, and Avtrac manages a large portion of the life cycle of a lot of assets, right? We don't do a lot of like new aircraft delivery, like straight from the OEM, but one of the, we're doing some back to birth, due diligence for some parts companies as well, right? And we recently had an assembly that came out for a shop visit on an old CFM engine, where the rotor and the full blade set came out as one Form 1. And we were, our client was like, well, we want HPT trace on all of the blades. And we were, the MRO had a packing list of the parts received, and the rotor and all of the blades at 0 time and 0 cycles. And we considered that one Form 1 to cover all of the blades and everything. And then it went on to a subsequent shop visit, and the times and cycles matched up and everything. And so, our client came back to us and it was like, this isn't full back-to-birth traceability on the blades. And so we start kind of running around like, okay, well, who do we, where would we get these from if we can't get them from, from the manufacturer? Like, where would we get this from? And, so we go back to the MRO, and the MRO tells us that there isn't any more documentation. And then ultimately we end up at CFM through an industry connection, got us the shipping list of all of the blades based on individual serial numbers.
Wow.
And yeah, and so the thing, so I say all of that, right? Not to point fingers at anybody here, right, or anybody involved on our side for potentially missing anything, or our customer or anybody else, right? The MRO. But I wrote down when you were just talking here, Garrick, about standardizing demand, right? So ultimately this engine had traded multiple times, okay? It had passed along with that one Form 1 for the entire module, the blades and the rotor, passed along multiple people, and everybody had signed off on it until it got to the teardown company, who was now looking for individual certs on all of the blades. But nobody had ever asked for that since 2008. And I still, to this day, don't know if there was an individual cert. I know we were able to get CFM to give us a shipping list, right, of each one of those blades based on serial number and part number. So I know that's as close as we were able to get. But if CFM, my question to one of our reps was, if there were, and we still don't know if there were individual certs on these blades, but if there were, why didn't CFM just provide those to us when we asked for them? So you see, like, the idea of this standardizing demand, everybody coming up and saying, okay, this constitutes back-to-birth traceability. Like, if you have this, then that's good. If this doesn't exist, so it's almost like a decision tree. Like, if this doesn't exist, then you get this. And everybody agrees that, okay, this is the backup if this doesn't exist. But this Form 1, or 8130 should always exist.
Back to birth. There's your company name.
Back to birth. BTB.
You're welcome. I'll just take 10% royalty, be fine, but
It's about to dim his screen here and buy the domain, and then it's going to be more than a 10% royalty.
It's hold on a second.
BacktoBirth.com.
Guys over there, GoDaddy.com right now.
Yep. He's also making sure he's trademarking time on wing coin.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love that. That's a great anecdote, right? Because what do you do? Like, it really kind of puts me in your mindset, right? Just the kind of stuff you guys deal with daily at Avtrac or monthly or whatever the case may be, where somebody says, hey, can you trace this down? I mean, I wouldn't call that technical documentation management. I wouldn't call it research. I would call that downright investigation.
Yeah, a lot of it is what we do, right? Like, we could have called up, I guess, that there weren't individual certs for all the blades, knowing that this customer generally wants individual certs for the blades, right? So we should have called it up. But when we did call it up, we were told by everybody that it didn't exist. And then ultimately, we didn't even get it from the manufacturer. So I still, to this day, don't believe that it actually existed, but we got as close to what the client was asking for as possible, right? So, that kind of stuff, from our perspective, always we try to do whatever our customer wants us to do, right? Because, in the end, I want them to continue to trust us. And as a guy that we all know, I'm sure, told me one time from a leasing company, when the expectation of companies like ours is perfection, there's no room for error, right? So, that's the highest standard to live to. But when we are your investigators, your back end research, your proof positive that you have everything you need to trade that asset or to maximize the value of that asset, there's a lot of responsibility there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it's going back to the comment that you made about kind of standardizing demand. I think that is important, especially in the environment that I think we're in today, where through COVID, everybody's kind of talked about this kind of brain drain that. The brain trust has kind of gone away through retirements and everything else from all sides of the industry. And so I think that's even more important today to have this level of expectation of like, look, these are the things that we need to tell our customers that they need to look for. Because ultimately you need to train that in the younger generation that's going through. Because not everybody's going to be like, oh, well, when I've been doing this for the last 30 years, so I know to look for X, Y, and Z. And if D's not there, then I know to look for, this side of it. If that's not there, nobody's going to ask. right? Nobody's going to know that, oh, you know what, I should have looked for it. And so I think that's something that, definitely needs to be looked at more closely to kind of make sure that future generations also know what to look for. Because at what point as you say, if everybody tells you it doesn't exist, at what point does somebody go, okay, well, that's fine, right? And and that's it. It ends there, right?
Well, I'll tell you who's not. I'll tell you who's not going to is the company that holds the asset and is being requested to provide that data so that they can maximize the sell price, right? Like that, and rightfully so. Garrett, you are getting just way into the weeds of what we really do, right? And I tell all of the guys that work with us, the brain trust of Avtrac, right? Like ultimately, I'm very customer facing, and generally I talk to customers when there's new projects or when there's an issue with one of the projects, right? In between, I don't get to see a lot, and so they interface with our technical reps, and we align our reps with individual companies and try to keep them working with those companies so that, just like you said, they understand what they want, so they're not bouncing all over our firm, right, from one person to another, getting different levels of service or attention being paid to one thing that may not matter to the customer. So we try to align our tech reps with the individual companies. Ultimately, what that creates, right, is everybody at Avtrac is a relationship manager in one way or another. Whether they want to say it or not, like they have to manage the relationship, they have to manage the client's expectations, and they have to manage the product that the client deserves and expects to get out of us, right? And again, when that level of expectation is perfection, there's no room for error. And so we have to be on all the time. And the way we do that, Garrett, is when a new client onboards with us, okay, we spend so much time learning as much as that client will share with us about their business model, right? Because not every operating lessor is the same. Obviously, not every airline is the same. So understanding, and not every parts company trader is the same, right? So understanding where that company is trying to carve out its niche and its differentiator helps us better service them, right? And that's one of the reasons that I think, over the 31-year history of this firm, our founder has really kind of stayed away from doing JVs, holding assets. We've never held inventory. We have stayed true to that independent technical services side of things, so that we can continue to work with the airlines, work with the lessors, work with parts companies. Because ultimately, right, like if we were to go out and try to compete at any level with them, we lose that credibility of being that true independent, objective voice, right? We almost take a fiduciary responsibility for our clients' transactions. I'm not saying that we do, but as a wealth manager, I understand that term, and it is always what's in the best interest of our clients, and that starts by learning as much about that business as we can on the front end, and making sure that personalities match up, that they're working with the right people, and that the knowledge base is the same, within both levels of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick question. Obviously through the last couple of years, right, between, I think having the ability to get into certain jurisdictions, some of the labor shortages where, obviously there's a lack of potential, technical, representatives that or knowledge that was out there. I guess, how have you guys handled that over the course of COVID in terms of not only having the right people to be able to handle the right clients, but also getting the right people to the right places? I mean, I think that to me has been something that's been fascinating over the last couple of years, just because it was such a challenge, especially at the heart of COVID, right? And obviously we're away from that now, but I'd love to hear from your side how you guys handle all of that. Yeah.
So, I mean, you know right off the bat that peak COVID, we weren't flying anybody into anywhere, right? So, if we were doing, early redelivery, which, at the peak of COVID, I would say October 2020 through the middle of 2021, I know at the peak we had 22 aircraft on our camo registry. 20 of those went back into service, and then the other 2 went to part out. But during that time, we were having to use industry connections that we had with other similar sized consultants. We didn't ever really go to work with any of the big ones, but with similar sized consultants and even some independent consultants here and there that we've had kind of in our broader network. We had to utilize those connections, right? And that's a kind of a good segue, if you guys don't mind. But we've worked with a company out of Florida that is similar in style to Avtrac, with a gentleman named Marcial Cassiano. The company is called M3. I don't know if do you guys know Marcial, Garrett?
Yeah, I know Marcial. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have actually agreed to acquire M3 as into Avtrac. Marcial and Tino Berry go way back and know each other, and there's a very high level of mutual respect between those two gentlemen. And so Marcial is going to actually come on board and head up our asset management division. I mean, we don't really have divisions at Avtrac. We just kind of all work together.
Just silos.
Right? But
bunch of silos.
He's gonna yeah. We just silo our individuals. That's the data we're siloing is our knowledge, our experience. That's good. But yeah, so Marcial is going to come over, run that program for us. So all of our due diligence inspections and everything like that, he's going to head that up for us. And so we are super excited to kind of be able to announce that. But ultimately, it was that level of expertise, similar size, similar style, similar approach, and guys like Marcial and the contractors that he's worked with, the network that he has, really kind of complements us in areas where we weren't as strong. We had to trust each other, to be honest. To make it short and sweet, Garrick, we had to trust relationship referrals and companies like M3 to help us out during COVID to fulfill that work.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find it still challenging? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask the 2 names of the founders.
So our founder is a gentleman named Valentine Berry. He goes by Tino Berry. Tino Berry is his name. And then the M3 founder is a gentleman named Marcial Cassiano, and he is a former technical VP at Mitsubishi Capital, and then he founded M3, I think, back in like 2017.
And the deal was signed in Sicily, apparently.
No,
that's amazing. It's really good.
It's actually signed in Amsterdam at MRO Europe.
Oh, yeah, cool. Okay.
At an Italian restaurant. There's a Sicilian restaurant. Yeah, that's great. That's great. I mean, I think that's obviously, I know Marcial not super well, but I know him, well enough, and certainly, yeah, he's got a great name in the industry. So it's great to be able to combine that, and I think that, what I was going to say before, Courtney rudely interrupted me as usual, was
know what?
I guess even in the current environment, when you so if we kind of think about the demand that's probably coming in for the level of services that you guys offer, it's probably through the roof, right? I'm sure that you guys have been probably busier than you've probably ever been. And so how do you manage ultimately keeping the right staff or adding the right staff in an environment where everybody else is probably looking for the same type of people that you are? So how do you manage that? Because that's got to be challenging too.
It's a balancing act, right? Honestly, we're again, with the longevity of our firm, we're very fortunate to have a core group of clients that are almost completely transparent with us, and as much as they know about their upcoming plans, we know about their upcoming plans, right? So we're able to kind of manage that scenario a little bit. But the ad hoc work, the new client, development and stuff. Honestly, Garrett, that's one of the things that has driven the need for us to find an acquisition to do. We've had to expand. We have to expand our full-time headcount and that trusted contractor base that we can use for physical inspections or for ramp ups in transition work when we're auditing records. We've had to go out and strategically find that. Again, having been around for 30 years, that was already kind of in place, and those relationships were there. But it gets to a point, just like you said, based on the level of work that you have, that it requires you to go do something like this strategic acquisition and merger with M3, right? Down the road, I don't know if there's additional consolidation or if there are additional partnerships that we would look to do. I can tell you that, one of the things that Tino and I have talked about is remaining solely focused on what we do best and not trying to expand our service offering right now, because there's so much work for us to do in our core offering of that camo, technical due diligence, technical data auditing, and so on, right? So right now, this, every company wants to grow, coming from early stage businesses, if you're not growing, you're dying, it's hard for me to get out of that mindset sometimes. But more than anything right now, we've got to focus on servicing the clients that have been with us the longest, managing the new business in a slow, controlled growth method to make sure that we can have access as a small business to the type of talent that is required by our clients on a daily basis, right? Because we do have to compete. We're competing with everybody else out there, right? The larger independent consultants, the lessors themselves, the airlines themselves. We're ultimately all trying to go after kind of the same technical knowledge. We all want that top-notch technical consultant or that technical guy that's worked on every different engine and every different OEM airframe. We want all of the same type of people. It's just, we've got to make sure that we control the growth of the business to service the clients with the staff that we have right now, and then look at doing strategic acquisitions and partnerships like we just discussed.
Yeah. What are you seeing as the biggest bottleneck kind of in that space? Maybe not necessarily specific to growing Avtrac, but just in that space of the MRO space, the technical definition space. I mean, is it the labor shortage? Is it parts? What are kind of some of the lead challenges in there?
Yes.
All the above. You're welcome.
That's cheating.
Really
all the above.
Yeah, that's cheating.
It absolutely is, right? If you want to talk about labor, right? It's the fact that, again, just like I said, everybody's competing for the same labor force, and I don't, personally, I don't think that we're doing a good enough job educating younger generations on the opportunities that exist in the maintenance realm of things, right? Mm-hmm. When you think about, at least when I was a kid, if you thought about aviation, it was like, oh, I want to be a pilot. I'll be perfectly honest right now. The opportunities that exist with, being an A&P mechanic to fly around the world, and, whether you work for different organizations or you work for different airlines or whatever it is, like the opportunity to have a hugely successful career, is right there, and it will continue to be there, right? So that, that's part of the whole labor bottleneck. The other issue that you have, right, in that we saw kind of in COVID, is you had airlines that were forced to go out and decrease their workforce, and you can't hire those people back overnight. Some of them went and found other jobs. Most of these people, like, if you can work on an aircraft engine, you can probably work on a lot of other things, right? Like we're not
if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball.
We're not talking about the simplest mechanical things. These aren't tinker toys, right?
Right.
so their skill sets transition to other skills, to other industries, I'm sure. And so, bringing those people back on is difficult. Scaling that has obviously proven difficult. And, ultimately, I think that, the OEMs are creating some bottlenecks for all of us too.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And that's the maintenance technician shortage that's global and getting worse right now is not getting enough attention. And this coming from the guy who talks about the pilot shortage all the time, mostly because there are just weird things in the pilot shortage that are self-inflicted. But the technician shortage is kind of what I would call a natural shortage, and that is we just need more than we're producing. And a lot of that has to do with, like you said, like how are we recruiting out of schools? How young are we recruiting? The idea of moving into this profession is it's competing now with all sorts of different jobs at a time when labor shortages aren't just a technician thing or a pilot thing or even an aviation thing. I mean, they're a global thing all of a sudden.
Do you think there is an opportunity there for companies like Avtrac or obviously M3 or to be able to create these apprenticeship ultimately to try to get, younger generation to take advantage of the fact that you've got experienced people that are there to teach them to be able to get into a field that, I'm sure for the, maybe the younger generation, you're like, oh, you know what? I don't really want to deal with kind of like wrenching and kind of playing with the metal and everything else. But ultimately, I think in today's environment, it's not, there's a lot more than that, right? It's because there is a lot of digitization. There's a lot of different things that you're doing. It's not just kind of like, oh yeah, I'm going to be kind of, tightening bolts all day. So I don't know if there is opportunities there for some of the smaller companies out there that have been doing this for a long time to try to generate that interest to be able to make sure that we've got the right people to keep working those fields.
There absolutely is. I mean, and it goes from the small micro businesses such as ours, right, where we have total full-time employee headcount of right at 30 people, all the way up to when we talk about the MROs, the AARs of the world, right? And it has to be collaborative, right? We have to figure out, where do we focus? The majority of the people at Avtrac are kind of homegrown, especially internally with our technical records and camo team. Most of those people have come up through Avtrac, right? Which is one of the reasons why, obviously, we're very cohesive, we're very adaptable, buzzword. But truth be told, it's because we've been together forever. And so, like, if one person is out or if one person is overwhelmed, the other person can pick it up because they've worked alongside that person for so long, right? So I think that, the idea of pushing that teamwork, I think younger generations are very social in that, they want to interact with other people. But like you said, it may not be they want to interact in a hangar with somebody, right? When we look at technical asset management, a lot of that happens off of the airplane, right? Like
right.
we don't there's not a lot of hands-on touching. So going out to younger generations at like almost like the middle school level, like I'm talking like 10, 11, 12 years old, and explaining to these kids what types of jobs exist in aviation. Because you're going to find, the kid that wants to be a banker his whole life or wants to be a lawyer and thinks, oh, well, he only sees law on TV. He doesn't know that there's a whole legal pathway through aviation, right? Here and I know that, here in Oklahoma City, law firms like McAfee and Taft, who are huge players in the aviation industry, like, I know they foster some of those programs. I know AAR does a good job in the communities that they're in trying to get interest, right? But it just, it takes time, it takes money, and it takes people that work at those companies being literally invested at a personal level to go out and promote the industry to them, right?
Yeah.
I think aviation is behind in that. And I think partly because aviation is so sexy. Oh, I mean, like, I am anyway, as a part of aviation. But truly, aviation is so sexy that we've kind of gotten complacent, frankly. Right?
Yeah.
If you
I
talk
would agree
about
wholeheartedly.
if you talk about working in aviation, you're thinking pilot. That's kind of been renewed. Maybe you're thinking about the business side. But let's just assume that there is a population of people that just, every generation there's a population that generation that are just super skilled on the mechanical side, working with their hands. That is not something that changes, like evolutionarily in our system, right? That they will be there.
Yep.
Is aviation attracting enough of its share of those people who are predicated to that kind of skill? And I would argue that it's not. It's probably not even trying to the level that it should.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it. How do we quantify how many of those people exist at each age level, right? And then aviation is battling with oil and gas, with all of these other big dollar industries,
mining, all that
have resources. Yeah. So, I was listening to the podcast this morning that you did with Abdul from GA. Mm-hmm. And, he came on, and the first thing, one of the first things you guys asked about, how he got started in aviation. And he said, as a kid, I didn't even think about aviation. As a kid, I didn't think about aviation. I didn't get started until my mid-30s, right? But I think what I would say is, now that we're talking about this, is we need to get kids thinking about aviation, right? And, if a kid thinks, that's something I'm interested in, it's very hard, and I think Abdul said this too, is, once you get in, it's very hard to get out, right? Like, and I think Courtney replied to that. Well, that's why they call them terminals at airports, right? Like, so
I'm not laughing at my own joke, I promise.
Yeah,
yes,
but that's funny.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, but the thing about it is there is something so attractive about looking up, hearing an airplane overhead, and looking up and seeing what it is, and recognizing delivery or recognizing the aircraft type, and being able to do that. And if you get kids doing that at 6, 7, 8 years old, I mean, that is fostering just, those kids are they're gonna move towards what, how their brain works, Garrick, like you were saying, like, how does that kid, function, right? And so, you're going to have your kids that go into finance, your kids that go into mechanics, the kids that go into engineering, the kids that go into, flying, and it's just getting them hooked on airplanes first.
Yeah. And look, it's just pulling our share. Yeah,
it is. You're right. It's pulling a share. I think it's also, to me, I think the attraction to getting the younger generations is, I think the opportunity is there to make a difference in terms of being able to come in and figure out a better way to do what's being done today, right? And I think people will generally be attracted with, like, oh, you know what, there could be a way, based on all the things that I'm learning and based on all the things that I know, that we could come up with something that's actually going to improve the way that this is done, right? And sure. and it goes back to kind of the comments that we were talking about before about trying to figure out how to make the technical services arena more efficient at what they do, so that it doesn't take a week to do an inspection of an airplane and records, where it takes more like 2 days, right?
Yep.
And I think that's where you can try to foster that interest from different generations that are much more technology savvy than I am, and probably most of us here, where all of a sudden you're like, hey, look, if you can go in this direction, but then you're also figuring out ways that you can help, you can be part of aviation and also help it, not just go in and go, look, you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and this is all you're going to do.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And I think that's, sometimes people kind of get, well, they have this vision in their head of what it is, and they're like, I don't really want to be stuck in that job. Because we can all think back to, like, oh yeah, you know what, I knew this, either whether it's in your family or like my uncle, like, he was a mechanic and he did this every day, right? And he came home and he was tired. I'm like, oh, it doesn't sound exciting, right? But I think aviation, just like probably a lot of other industries now, can be pretty exciting in terms of like all the different things that you can do. Because ultimately, we are trying to get more efficient in what we do so that we can do it with potentially fewer people, because we may not need as many people when things are slow, but when it gets busy, you will also want to be able to do things, but not just mean like, hey, you just need to work more, right? It's kind of finding better ways to work. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying, I think, we should definitely, figure out ways to encourage, I think, the younger generations to kind of want to get into that space a little bit more.
Well, I think what you're basically saying there, right, is letting younger generations know that within this industry that is highly regulated, and that there is a lot of what you said, you're going to do this day in and day out. There are still ways where anybody can come in and foster innovation, right? Like you can be part of the change in the industry if you want to spend the time and the effort and the bandwidth to figure out how to affect that change, right? I think there are other industries that are obviously dealing with this same type of stuff. I think, Courtney, you are correct in what you said earlier, that, basically the industry maybe got a little complacent on, we knew we were going to get all these military folks to come in here and do all this. And now here we are where, again, COVID was a catalyst for us, but we've got, and I would love your guys' feedback on this, but like we've got so much demand right now. Everybody wants to fly everywhere. I mean, long hauls back, and we've been doing domestic stuff here in the United States just crazy for over a year now. Like it is, I know it's all going to wane a little bit coming up, but like the buying the experience is definitely still there, it seems like. And I think that, younger generations very much love the idea of traveling around the world and, getting their Instagram photos.
So that's social media. It's like, look where I am today. You're
Yeah,
right.
I mean,
Okay, so
the Eiffel Tower is only getting more popular.
speaking of social media, because I do want to piggyback on a point you just made, but I do kind of want to move into the supply side as well. The idea of attracting talent, it reminded me of a post that I saw actually today on LinkedIn, and I was looking for it. I couldn't find it, so I apologize to whoever put it up, but it was phenomenal. There was a group of people that went to an aircraft that had skin damage on its nose, and they repaired it so that it could be flown out. And they took several pictures of, they took the metal off, then they had the rivet pins in it, and then the last picture was of, I can't remember, the 4 or 5 people who worked on it, and they like just took a picture, their arms around each other, like, hey, we just did this. I was like, that's great. Like, what a great, I mean, it goes to that next step of, not only did we do this, we're proud of it, there's the team element of it, and I guess what surprised me so much about it was how surprised I was. I'm like, oh, I've never seen anything like that before. Why not? Like, what a great thing to celebrate. I mean, that would have been one of the most satisfying events of my year had I been a part of that team. And we don't celebrate that, right? Even on the technician side and the repair side. I love to see stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I saw that post as well, and
who was it?
I don't know. Come on, man.
I know. Well, okay, so it wasn't that great.
Yeah, it was almost good marketing. Almost.
Our feeds look all the same, But I think that may be part of it, right? Is getting into it takes. I'm not even though I'm ahead of sales and marketing, right? Like I'm not that marketing guy, But telling those personalized stories and putting a face to the work and seeing the pride that was on those technicians' faces, that tells, like you say, the story of how cool it can be, right? Like Is the work something that you're going to get excited about every single day? No, maybe not. Like Garrick was saying, like turning the wrench every single day may not be what thrills you, but the face of the kid getting on the plane, knowing that you're responsible for that kid's his good time, his safe travel, and him getting to go somewhere that he's maybe never been before. Like all of that stuff, all of that combined becomes part of that marketing story to tell younger generations that, listen, you are changing people's lives every day when you go to work, right? Like it's a remarkable industry, and I can honestly say if I'm fortunate enough, I'll never leave it at this point. And I can only say that I wish I would have probably gotten into it earlier, but now that I have the opportunity, I think, combined, we have to commit ourselves to telling the story of how cool aviation is to younger generations.
Yeah. And there's definitely a lot of different aspects to aviation. And I think that's one of the things that, I certainly love about it, and being on the advisory side, the consulting side, you just get to interact with all kinds of people all over the world, all different aspects of it. I mean, and that's, it's not just about being part of an airline or being, part of a manufacturer. There's so many different things that you can do in aviation. It's tremendous, right? And that being able to meet all kinds of caliber of people and what they do, and it makes it fun every day. And like you say, I mean, whether you're turning a wrench or you're doing an appraisal, like doing an appraisal is like, okay, yeah, yay, it's like another 737-800 to appraise, woohoo.
Yep.
But it's the discussion that I have to somebody else about, hey, what are you seeing in that market? Or I didn't realize. Right? It's everything else that goes around that. I think that's what makes it fascinating in terms of being part of this industry.
I'm over here doom scrolling. I can't find this thing for the life of me, but I have seen about 3 different posts of people trying to explain the difference between a manager and a leader. So there's that. But hopefully, let's test our listenership here. Hopefully, by the time we publish this, somebody says, "I know who that is," and they reach out and let us know, because I didn't. Apparently, it wasn't enough for me to click the thumbs up, and I should have. I will if some.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. And so for our next podcast, it'll be sponsored by whoever made that video.
Yeah.
So you touched on the demand recovery, the supply issues, all that on the kind of the post-COVID world, and really kind of interested how this is touching your side of the industry specifically. I mean, because we're seeing all these competing forces just kind of converge all at once. The lower production rates, demand came back, new aircraft production isn't there. We have new kit, especially on the engine side, that are not seeing the time on wing that that they want to. All this leading to more it's more dependency, more requirement for really the MRO's shop space, like just even physically space and time and the length of those shop visits. I'm really interested in your perspective on like what's fundamentally different today in that side of the industry than before COVID.
Yeah. So I mean, I think let me just say one thing here real quick. If my computer dies, I will jump back on another device. So you'll have to edit that, Courtney. But,
no worries.
But I think more than anything right now, right? Like what we have is we have that necessitated extension of late life aircraft right now, where generally these aircraft would be coming out of the market, right? And they're battling along with new aircraft who we didn't anticipate needing as maintenance events as early as they are right now. So now you've got late life aircraft that shouldn't even be in the hangar anymore because they should be on their way out. And you've got new aircraft that shouldn't be in the hangar because they're so young competing for the same slots. You have investors that are going into the boneyard to resurrect aircraft that were never probably going to fly again, but now all of a sudden have to because there's lack of supply at the new aircraft level, at the midlife level, at the late life level, and in your second and third tier operators, like way down the pipeline, right? Like the guys that would be flying the oldest aircraft on the planet are now having to go back and find lift from various resources, right? Now throw on top of all of that, right, that we also have the Russians came and took all those aircraft offline. So, this is a perfect storm of demand and lack of supply at every level, right? Like you said, at new aircraft delivery, at resources for overhauling current assets. We're trying to extend the life of everything. It's just, it's a perfect storm, Courtney, at this point.
And how does that storm affect Avtrac? I'm truly curious of that and how you.
Yeah, it's as crazy as it sounds, right? Like volatility is in this industry has been good for us, right? Because right now I will tell you that a lot of what we're doing are mid-lease inspections that didn't get done during COVID. And now everybody is saying, okay, we've got to finally go look at these airplanes. I mean, some of these aircraft haven't had a mid-lease done on them in 3 years, right? And that is not generally the term, the interval, right? You don't normally look at 36-month intervals, right, on leased aircraft. So we're doing a lot of mid-lease. There's also the scenario that I mentioned earlier, where one buyer is getting aircraft that the seller or the returning operator actually wanted back, but now can't get back because the aircraft have already been sold, right? So companies that were expecting, airlines that were expecting new aircraft to come in, OEM new deliveries, are now having to go back and find additional lift because the network is already in place. They've got routes to service, right? So, any time that there's trading, that there's prolonged, activity, where, you need a rep on site for an extended period of time, you need, delivery binder buildup for an unexpected redelivery or an unexpected delivery to somebody else. That kind of stuff is where we thrive, right? Truth be told, the worst thing that can happen to us is everybody flying aircraft and nothing breaking. And we don't have that problem right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think you ever will. I think there's always going to be something, right? I mean, you have the benefit of having different jurisdictions with different environments. So, I think that'll never be the case. So I've got one question that I'm going to ask, which one of our avid listeners actually asked me this morning. And so I thought it was a great question, which I think I'm going to start asking our guests when they're on the show. When you think about COVID, what would be one good thing that came out of COVID? There's a lot of bad stuff that we dealt with, but can you think of anything that was good that came out of COVID that potentially could be related to the business that you're in today?
Yeah, I mean, I think from us directly, like I mentioned before, we were forced to go out and establish relationships with either firms our size. Truth be told, if COVID hadn't happened, I'm not sure that Martial and Kino would have gotten to the point where they are selfishly from an Avtrac standpoint to get this merger done, right? Like I think we probably still would have just operated down our own path, even though those guys knew each other for multiple decades, right? Industry-wide, that collaborative effort, the whole that whole cliche thing of we're all in this together, we really kind of were, and we saw a lot of collaboration that nobody listening to this podcast nor us have to get into everything that went on. But, everybody seemingly was working to try and find the best result, from an operational standpoint. And so I think, truth be told, the transparency, the willingness to work together, and the way to go about how we kind of, move aircraft around from, a transactional standpoint. I think all of that got a lot more operationally efficient during COVID, right? Like, we figured out that there was a lot more we could do from remotely than having to be on site and face to face. Now, as an industry, we're all coming back to, face to face meetings, and our conferences are back on, but there's still a lot that can be done.
So, Adam, listen, this has been, really, really interesting. I'm so glad that we've had the chance to kind of chat with you about your experiences and what you guys are doing today and all that is, technical. It's definitely always interesting just because it's such an important part of aviation. So thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, and hopefully we'll have you on again at another point in the future and hearing kind of what you guys are doing at that point. So thank you.
Yeah. Awesome, Garrick. I really do appreciate it, guys. Courtney, thanks as well. I mean, after listening to the podcast and seeing who you guys have had on, I'm honestly honored that I had the opportunity, and thanks for your interest in our small little technical services company, and hopefully, we all get the opportunity. I know we'll get the opportunity to see each other, but hopefully we get the opportunity to work with each other in the future as well.
Rock on.
Perfect.
Adam, yeah, thank you again for joining. What have you done with your life?
As little as possible. I've really just piggybacked on other people.
Well, I'll take that for the compliment it is. You're welcome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
Let me
I
just
look
say
for
that.
successful
You are
people, and I
welcome.
just kind of jump on board, and I just ride their
And you
coattails.
That's my strategy too.
Is that where we're going around in circles?
Are we just going around circles? What are you doing? I'm hanging on coattails. What are you doing? I'm hanging on to coattails.
Yeah.
Visual approach analytics and collateral verifications, riding coattails since 2020.